Tech industry workers have been experiencing more gender and racial harassment while working from home during the pandemic. That's according to a new survey by Project Include. The nonprofit found more than 1 in 4 tech employees said they have encountered a spike in behavior, like yelling, uncomfortable or repeated questions about identity and appearance, and even requests for dates or sex. Joining us now to break down the research is NPR tech correspondent Shannon Bond. Shannon, this was a remarkable report, and I think a lot of people would be surprised to read it, how hostility has moved from physical and in-person actions to online interactions because so many workers have obviously begun working from home in the age of the pandemic. So explain to our viewers, what sort of harassment are people experiencing most, and what's behind this uptick?
That's right. I mean, this is something that the authors wanted to look at because they were hearing anecdotally. People were saying, yes, we've gone home, we're not in the office, but actually we're still experiencing harassment. And so this is everything from what real harassment, intense harassment, sexual harassment, through to what they describe more as workplace hostility that may not break company rules, but still creates a hostile environment. More than 1 in 4 experienced more gender. Many people were reporting more race-based hostility, particularly high among women, among people of color, among trans. But then the authors say, this really points to a lot of the pre-existing equities in the workplace that have just been exacerbated during the pandemic, even though everybody is working remotely. And in terms of reasons for some of these spikes, what they were saying was, go ahead, sorry.
Well, you're probably going to get to the question that I was going to kind of ask, which is I think that why the results of this is so surprising is because the expectation is in order to be harassed, you have to be sort of physically close to someone. And, a lot of, at least my interactions working remotely, tend to be very business related, and there isn't a lot of casual conversation because it's a Zoom meeting or it's a quick email. But this is finding that no, that's definitely not the case, and we're talking about people of color, women, transgender people, non-binary people. They're the ones that are saying that they are being harassed more than sort of before. What is it? Is it because you're not anonymous behind the screen like you would be kind of in everyday life because you work with these people. Why is it easier to behave badly when people are working remotely?
Well, I think there's sort of some backdrop happening here, which is that the report also just the survey found more anxiety. This is a survey of 3,000 people across the country. 85% of people are saying they're experiencing more anxiety. And there is a blurring of the distinctions between work and home life when you are working at home. And then on top of this, you're having more interactions in these sort of one-on-one digital spaces. So over video chat, in chat apps, in some of these workplace, in emails. And despite the fact that that is actually leaving a record, it's leaving a written record, the survey found that people were reporting, they were more uncomfortable in many cases in these environments. And, one of the theories is that actually, when you're using some of this software that we've all had to get used to using over the past year, there aren't actually as clear ways to report harassment. There's sort of not maybe a clear way to capture what's happening and flag it to HR. There's also, you don't have witnesses, right? If someone is you feel like is being inappropriate and it's a one-on-one, you don't necessarily have someone to back you up. And many of these particularly marginalized people who are already underrepresented in tech, they also felt uncomfortable, they told the researchers, reporting this to their companies. They weren't confident that HR or their leadership would take it seriously. And so again, it's sort of compounding, exacerbating these pre-existing inequities, making it more difficult in this time when we are sort of more isolated and don't have that same kind of workplace support.
Yeah, it is interesting, Shannon, too, because I've sort of described to some people that I feel, just even as reporters, that we are working just as hard, if not harder in some cases, by working from home. I know that must be the case for a lot of other people because when you're available so readily from your living room or from your kitchen table, it feels as if to some people who are your supervisors or your bosses that you're always around because you don't have to travel somewhere, they can reach you. And so that has contributed to, I guess, the sense of general anxiety that has grown for some employees. And there can be no excuse for this type of behavior, but is it also because our supervisors, our bosses, I don't mean me personally, but in general, have higher expectations of people that are working from home?
Well, certainly in the survey, they found 2/3 of people were saying they were working longer hours. I think in many of these cases, people have replaced the time maybe they had spent commuting. They're just working those hours. And that is contributing to higher levels of burnout, higher levels of anxiety. Supervisors not necessarily setting their own boundaries about, when they're going to be responding to email, when they're expecting workers to be available. And workers not necessarily feeling that they have the channels to be able to report these kind of problems. I mean, many workplaces, had to transition to almost work from home effectively overnight, and from experiences where they had been all in the office together, suddenly the next day everyone's at home. There weren't necessarily guidelines, frameworks, they hadn't thought through, are we building a work culture that is more positive, that is supportive of people in this very difficult time. And also, of course, this is not just working remotely. This is working remotely during a pandemic. There are many other stresses in people's lives. People are dealing with childcare, the higher unemployment rates that are particularly affecting women, people of color, Black people in particular. And that has also contributed, the survey found, to people feeling uncomfortable, wanting to report these things. They're concerned in many cases about their job security.
You know what I thought when I read your piece on NPR's website is we've done a lot of stories about the need for more diversity within the tech industry, the need for the culture to change so that it's more accepting of different types of people. And I mean, we've been talking about this for, I feel like, a few years now. And the results of this survey just indicate to me that while there might have been committees set up or, a push to hire more diverse people, that the actual culture hasn't changed enough. That the second, the traditional workplace was sort of upended a little, then the culture just reverted back to what it had been before. The second that there weren't people sort of overhearing the conversation at the coffee machine or at your cubicle, then the behavior just reverted to what it was like before. What needs to be done to correct this then?
Right. So one of the main authors of the study is Ellen Pao. It's her group, Project Conclude, which is an advocacy group for diversity here in Silicon Valley. And, what she told me was that, this is something about, exactly, this is not just about, it is about individual changes. It is about, making sure people know their correct channels for being able to report harassment and abuse. It's about, managers setting better examples, giving people real time off, giving people real mental health resources. But it is much larger than that. She said, this really highlights, what they have been pushing for years, which is better diversity, companies where at all levels you are seeing representation, people who are at the table making decisions who understand the concerns of, everybody in the workplace. And, they are certainly pointing to the results of this survey as further evidence that there's still a long way to go at many of these companies in terms of getting that kind of representation, getting that kind of diversity and leadership to be able to address these problems so that workers, whether they are returning to the office in the coming months or continuing to work at home, feel safe in their workplaces, and people understand what the appropriate behavior is.
Shannon, presumably the same policies that companies and organizations have in place to prevent this kind of behavior in the office, in person, would apply to behavior online? Or is it that many of these transgressions are slipping under the radar?
It seems certainly from the survey results that in many cases it did seem they were slipping under the radar. It's not that these things are okay because they're happening at home, but people weren't necessarily as confident in how they could report them, in whether they would be believed. And because there were sort of these new forms, people were getting used to, what it was like to conduct their meetings over Zoom, or over Skype, or other forms of video chat, relying more on email and some of these other workplace collaboration tools. And so, one of the other recommendations of the report is that companies just, if they're going to be using these kind of software, these kind of tools, they need to be clear with people about how to use them, how to report inappropriate behavior. If somebody is in your company's Slack and posting offensive memes, is there an easy and simple way for you to know, to click a button that would allow you to flag it? Like a lot of things in tech, this comes back down to these are just tools, and how do we ensure people are using them in a way that is not harming other people?
So true. Shannon Bond, really interesting conversation. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.